I would like to talk about some lessons of the singularity, because as I was saying, a singularity is a time at which things change from one way of living and doing things to another. Another that we might think about is the invention of fire. After our ancestors started using fire, we became dependent on it. Sorry about that. Unlike the cousin primates, we cannot eat a lot of raw foods. We have these very small, weak jaws, which are very good for eating cooked food, and they're very good for having a big brain. So let me go into what I mean by this. So I have been working on aspects of the singularity now for a number of years. Here are two books that I helped do research on. I had the great honor of being able to work for Ray Kurzweil for the book The Singularity is Near, and also had the honor of working with Stephen Kotler and Peter Diamandis on the book Abundance. In that book, looking at charts and graphs that show the types of change that we are seeing in the world. And yes, one of the charts that I worked on is this chart looking at over 100 years of changes of computing. And it is a remarkable chart. It shows the singularity as in some ways already happening. But one thing I want to talk about, what is exciting about the new technologies that we are working with today, including the new technologies that Brad was talking about, is that these are not new technologies. In many cases, when we look at what is exciting, we should not be saying what is exciting is what is in one researcher's laboratory. We should say what is exciting are the technologies which are really old. So for example, translation. It is a very useful thing right now. We dreamed about having translation 50 years ago. Here it is in Star Trek. And even in 2012, when she was able to meet the president of the time, translation was invisible to us. It existed a little bit, the software translation, but it wasn't perfect. But how many of you have seen that Skype today offers translation, not just in 1 or 2 languages, but in 40 languages? You have these technologies which are old, but they have gotten good, they have gotten cheap, they've gotten inexpensive. Again, the ability to explore in a submarine underwater, this is not new, but I remember as a child seeing these National Geographics, imagining being to be able to explore, to be able to see underwater, but I could not do that because I had to be Jacques Cousteau. I had to be a government or a very large company to even dream about building this. And over time, as these technologies become smaller, less expensive, more democratized, they turn into this. It is an open source software. This is a project at a maker fair, a celebration of all things that people are making, where high school students, teenagers, are building robots to explore. And if any of you want to do that, you can just go, as Brad was saying, it's an open platform. It is a hackable platform that you can do this yourself. And I know people who are building this. You can take these and you can put pollution sensors on them, so you do not need to wait for a government to do pollution testing. You do it yourself. Now, exactly 1 year and 1 day ago even, I was walking in downtown Christchurch, New Zealand. I took these photographs of this empty city, of these broken buildings, because damage had happened in earthquakes before, very bad earthquakes 5 years earlier. And then that night, 2 minutes after midnight, there was a 7.8 earthquake. I would advise, do not do that. It is not fun. It lasted for 2 minutes long. It felt like it was going on for forever. And when we think about these seismographs that governments have put to do studies, that's one way of doing it, but we're saying, well, wait a minute, we all have these cell phones. Our cell phones are now our music players. Our cell phones are now our libraries, but can our cell phones also be earthquake measurement devices? Well, here in the world, it exists. There is an app that you can get for your Android phones where, using AI, it can see if shaking is happening, and it can tell, oh, it's shaking because you're riding a bicycle, but certain types of movements, the AI has been trained on, it can indicate, it can tell, there's an earthquake going on right now. Let me go into some other aspects of exponential technologies and why they are changing what we are building for the 21st century. Now, as I say, many of these technologies, we dream about them, and we dream about beautiful robots, and then when the reality comes up, it's not very good, right? There's many years where people were building these and they could not even find the ball. And you would be waiting and saying, well, these dreams are still dreams, it's 100 years away. But in part because of different projects going on, including government initiatives and prize competitions, we start seeing robots that actually are working and are doing things, including these are both Korean robots who competed in the DARPA Challenge 5 years ago. Now, I want you to look at these robots because you see that they have chains holding them up, because these robots, if they were to fall down, you would damage many hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of robot. That was 5 years ago. But here's a picture that I took 2 years ago. And this is a robot that did fall down, and it did knock its head off. This one did not win the competition. But here we see one of the robots, the one from KAIST, that is able to do things which previously we did not dream of robots being able to do, being able to walk around, turn valves, be able to take a drill and do things. And KAIST at the end was the winner, and 10,000 people were there in the audience cheering it on as it walked up a staircase. How many people saw that video 2 years ago? It was an amazing moment. Now, this robot took 50 minutes to accomplish all of these tasks. And you say, well, 50 minutes, that's not good enough if you need a robot to rescue people, for example. But of course, if it can do it in 50 minutes, 2 years later, it can do it in 20 minutes. Another 2 years later, it's doing it in 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute. And now you have a robot which can do human activities at the speed of humans, which is very valuable. But of course, remember, there's this long trend which doesn't stop. 2 more years after that, the robot is able to move faster than a human. It is able to do things which humans today cannot do, and we need this to exist. And of course, as I say, I was in the audience, 10,000 people were there cheering these robots, because it is new, it is exciting that these exist now. But for a child who's born today, a child who was born in the century, this is now just the background to our lives. Robots in the 21st century are going to be like electricity or water in the 20th century and earlier. So we have not just these new technologies, but new expectations, new mindsets, new foundation on which we build the lives we want to live. Another aspect of these exponential changes is that the price for the performance that you get drops rapidly, right? So when you think about what you would like to exist, you think about people building these new technologies. Here is a team called Planet. They build satellites. They build satellites and put them up there. You can see it's a regular startup. And these satellites are able to take ground-based pictures everywhere in the world. But most importantly, that part is not different from what existed in the past. But what is different is that these satellites cost $150,000 each. They don't cost $150 million. They don't cost $1 billion. It used to be that only governments and the largest companies could put up telecommunication satellites and other types of satellites. Now here you have, they're putting up for $150,000 each. Now what this means is that these satellites, they put them up 20, 30 at a time. They don't last very long, but you can afford for them to only last 2 years and go back down. They provide this information for free to many organizations, disaster response organizations, humanitarian organizations. And here is an amazing moment that just happened this year, this month, is that every day, every square meter of planet Earth is imaged by a Planet satellite. Every day. It used to be that if you needed this imagery, if you weren't the government, you had to wait several weeks to set it up, or you had to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get an image. Nonprofits, ordinary people now, every day for free. Another change that is happening, for example, here is a team that came out of the Singularity University program in 2010. They looked at the problem of space. Up in the space station, we think about the space station when we see it in science fiction, or these empty corridors. Now, the International Space Station is filled with materials. Now, this is exceptional picture. They were loading it in there, but it is filled with materials. It is crowded because they need backup for everything that they have. If something breaks, you need to have another one there because it's very expensive to send it up from Earth. The Maiden Space team said, look, can we build this? Can we build a 3D printer? Can we build a 3D printer that can be on the space station, and if an astronaut there needs a new tool, it is not a tool that is sent up, it is a file that is sent up, and an hour or two or overnight, there the tool is. Now, this was designed for space. This was designed for one specific situation, but of course 3D printers are expanding, and when we think about our own lives, our own cities, we also have a lot of materials which are just sitting there as backup, as storage, just in case we need it. There are stores which are filled with gardening tools or gardening objects, just in case one of ours breaks. What if instead, just like them, we can 3D print anything that we need? If you don't have the printer at home, of course, the 3D printer, the object can be delivered by an autonomous car. If the object doesn't exist yet, you can call out to the world and say, please design this object for me. Because of this infrastructure that we have in our lives, the background of communication, the background of electricity, all of this is now possible. This is not just about material goods that we have by choice, but it's also for the most essential needs that we have for fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals, for being able to have clean water, to be able to have medicines. This is a team which also came out of the Singularity University program who said that, look, 1 billion people live in areas around the world where you do not have roads. And if you do not have roads today, all of the year or part of the year, even if you have a cell phone, even if you can say, my child is ill, my child needs antibiotics, how do the antibiotics get from the hospital to a distant town if there is no road? They said, the small team, we can solve it. They looked around and said, what could we use? Well, there's this, in 2011, new to everybody idea called the drone. And of course, drones were not new. Drones had been around for decades, but what was new in 2011 is small drones that were being used as toys, something to play with. But they said, look, if we can take these toys, not too expensive, so you can have a lot of them, just like the satellites, you can start using them to be able to move goods like medicines or medical tests. So they launched in 2011. In 2014, they're doing tests in remote areas to be able to move them around. Papua New Guinea is a poor country. Malawi is also a very poor country. And as they do these tests, though, this use in one area also has applications in others. This year, they're doing tests not in another low-income country, but in Switzerland, the Swiss postal system, to be able to move letters. If you have a town or a house very far up, have the device, have the drone move it. Do not have a person driving this car all the way up there. They're using it to deliver tests from one hospital to another hospital. And again, if it's an emergency situation and you need to move a test, some blood from one place to another, if the traffic is terrible, this small device, which was once a toy, or before that we thought of them as weapons and very expensive, becomes part of the critical infrastructure of our lives. Now, as we think about these technologies changing, I mentioned the drone being able to replace a post person moving during this time. We saw these robots. Brad, of course, talked about autonomous vehicles, that we would not need drivers, how Uber, for example, is saying, but we will not have drivers in 10 years. And this can have profound effects. Now, one of the areas that I study is looking at automation and the future of jobs. Now, when we look at jobs today in the world, there are jobs which we will hope go away. There are jobs which are dangerous. There are jobs which, at the end of the day, you are in pain. At the end of the day, you feel sick. And if we can have robots and other ways of replacing them, this could be a good thing. But at the same time, these robots being designed for one situation, these automatic AI devices, they aren't working just in any one area. They're working on all areas simultaneously. The job of radiologist, for example, is starting to disappear as a routine human job. Now, this can be considered very bad. If you or a friend is studying radiology in medical school, I would recommend that you study radiology plus something else. Radiology alone is going to disappear as a job. And this over and over again, we could look into a future where these might be going away. But that said, if these are changing all over the world, manual labor and knowledge labor, this could change the world rapidly. But I would like to say this is not a new worry that we have. We have been worried about automation for decades. And so some people are saying, well, for decades, we don't have to worry about it. People have predicted failure in the past. It hasn't happened. Why do we not need to worry about it for the future? As was already mentioned, even today, we have technologists, some of whom are saying we do not need to worry about this at all. Others are saying there is grave danger that we could lose 1 billion jobs, which is a third of all of the jobs in the world today, due to automation. Now, this is an issue that we need to consider, that we need to talk about, because if this happens, this would be a global situation. It would be happening simultaneously. It would be a very chaotic and unpredictable situation. You know, do we know what type of job might disappear in 10 years or 15 years? Which jobs somebody might be able to build an AI and a surprise happens to us and our job looks like it's disappearing? Global and chaotic, potentially dangerous, this sounds like something else that we have already been seeing. Think about climate change. The idea of climate change is that slow trends adding up can suddenly, well, not suddenly, but it'll feel like suddenly, make massive changes everywhere. It is chaotic. Some places might do better, but some places don't do worse. And of course, you cannot wait until you have 100% proof to act on it. With climate change, if we waited for the temperature to change by 4 degrees, it is too late. We have to make decisions about it now. And we are making decisions about it. Well, consider the future of jobs as being a form of economic climate change. But, and here is the key point, with climate change, when you look at the scale of our response to climate change, we right now in the world are seeing COP23, Paris, the Paris Agreement, that was COP21. We have had 23 annual meetings where thousands of researchers and scientists get together. There are over 100,000 research papers. There are detailed models. When these researchers are coming together, these researchers are coming from many different fields, not just 1 or 2 fields to talk about it. When we're looking about the future of jobs right now, in comparison, sometimes these conferences on the future of jobs, you have 200 people, and they're almost entirely technologists or economists talking about it. So perhaps I would like you to consider that when we talk about the future of jobs, when we see one person saying, oh, it will be beautiful, and another person saying, we don't know, or it will be terrible, that our conclusion, all of us in society, is that it is too early to make a conclusion. The conversation so far is too small, that the conversation should look like the climate change conversation, where people worldwide from many different fields, scientists and non-scientists, have joined together to work on it. Because the future of jobs right now, we need these robots to exist, right? These robots were designed for disaster response. And when you think about an earthquake like this, we want robots to be able to go in there and do rescuing. But I would like to make a very important point about these technologies and how they exist and how we use them. This was the Fukushima earthquake. This is a warning system. When this earthquake started in Japan, everybody's mobile phones, all the TVs, all the television sets started an alert, making noise, counting down. An earthquake is going to be arriving here in 29 seconds, 28 seconds. You can see videos of it. At 3, 2, 1, the ground is shaking. I want this. I wanted this when I was in Christchurch. When I was experiencing this, I could not get this in Christchurch in New Zealand because it didn't exist in New Zealand. It doesn't exist in California. This research project, MyShake, it is an app, but it does not give you a warning. Not only does Japan have these warnings, they have had these warnings for a decade, 10 years. But do you get this warning in Chile, or in Italy, or in Iran? There was just a terrible earthquake this week. Just because these technologies exist, just because they've been demonstrated, even though these technologies are very, very good, useful, and desirable, it does not mean that we are going to have them. So when we look at these trends of technologies coming up, we have to ask ourselves, what will we be choosing to make and choosing to build? But here's the critical point for you to think about with all of these things. For all of the examples that I just gave to you, I told you that I know people who are building these technologies. I know people who are building satellites. I know people who are building drones. I know people who are building autonomous cars. I know people who are building artificial intelligence systems to be able to diagnose diseases. I'm not saying that I know giant companies who are building them. I'm not saying that I'm knowing giant companies or governments that are building them. These are small teams of people getting together, communicating with each other, and building out solutions which we all need, which we all want, and which can save us from medical problems, from disaster problems, from all of the problems that we have today. So when we think about a singularity era, think about what it means that each year, the number of people who can choose to come together and build these technologies, to build cars, to build houses, to build safety devices, to build medical tests, all of these together is rising as rapidly as the underlying technologies. So the era of the singularity is an era where humanity is choosing what to build for itself, individually in small villages, not waiting, but building the solutions that they see to the problems that they have. Take these ideas and extrapolate them out 5, 10, 15 years. We will be seeing an era where humanity can be building together solutions to all the problems that we face, not waiting, but building, not experiencing problems, but solving those problems. Thank you.